think there's a spirit in my house. So, there are 3 different stories I want to share about things that have happened in my house. It's probably worth noting that at least one person has died in this house. My wife and I purchased this house 5 years ago after her aunt, the previous owner, passed away in the living room area. Additionally, our aunt's dog was put down the same day that she died. It was in her will. The dog was 17 years old, blind, deaf, couldn't stand on his own without someone holding him, so he needed major help just eating and going potty outside, and he also had a moderate case of cancer. I need to mention these things because this contributes to the lingering spirit in the house. Story 1. A few months after moving in, my father-in-law came to visit and stayed the night in the guest bedroom. This room contains our internet modem, or router, which emits a very bright blinking set of lights. Around 4 p.m., my father-in-law asked if we could put some electrical tape over the blinking lights, so it would be easier for him to sleep later. So, we did. We all then left the house and went out for dinner. Back at home around 8 p.m., we noticed the router no longer had electrical tape covering the lights. Weird. We all asked each other if anyone removed the tape. Nope. I inspected the router all over, near the floor and everything, and no sign of any tape. My father-in-law decided he'll just turn the router around and place his duffel bag in front of it to block the lights. The following morning, we were eating breakfast, and I went into the spare bedroom because our internet stopped working, and thought I needed to reboot the router, or see if my father-in-law accidentally unplugged something. It was then that I discovered the electrical tape was, once again, covering the lights. It wasn't wrinkled, nor did it show signs of dust from possibly falling off. I asked my father-in-law if he reapplied the tape, and he said no. In fact, he doesn't know where we keep the electrical tape, so he couldn't, even if he wanted to. All 3 of us vividly remember the electrical tape being completely absent before going to bed. The light emitted from the router is hard to mistake. It's obnoxiously bright, and if tape were on it the night before, it would have been obvious. So, yeah, somehow the tape was completely removed, then reapplied, and nobody claims they did it. Ghost tape. Story 2. This happened last year. My wife was tired and wanted to take a nap around 5 p.m. So I'm in the living room watching Netflix, and after about 20 minutes, I hear a faint crying sound coming from my bedroom. I quietly make my way over and lean toward the bedroom door. It distinctly sounded like my wife was crying, but trying to keep it quiet. I go to open the door and comfort her, however, the door is locked. I sent her a text message telling her I was here if she needed anything. No response, so I figured she just wanted to be left alone. I go back to watching Netflix. 45 minutes pass, and I can still hear the crying. So I go back again to check on her and attempt to open the door. This time the door is unlocked. The very moment that I touched the door handle, the crying stopped immediately. So I thought to myself, what on earth is she keeping from me? As I entered the room and prepared to comfort her for anything. However, as I entered the room, I noticed she was completely asleep. She had a bit of drool going on, and her breathing pattern indicated that she was in fact asleep. There's no way she could fake being asleep that good, and so abruptly too. I gently woke her up and asked if everything was okay, and she seemed confused. She had to reassure me several times that A, I'm fine, really, and B, I have no idea what you're talking about. She wears her heart on her sleeve, so I know there's no way she could keep something like that from me. She's a terrible actor. I'm genuinely convinced that someone or something was quote-unquote crying in that room, but I'm simultaneously convinced it wasn't my wife. My wife. Story 3. This is a short one, and it happened on Valentine's Day this year. We were getting ready to leave, and we're doing some last-minute tidying up. We typically try to clear the floors of all objects, so we can turn on our Roomba before we leave. We've had our Roomba for about 6+ years, and it has never once malfunctioned or done anything weird. My wife was across the house and she yelled to me, "About ready?" And I respond, "Yeah, just gotta turn on the Roomba, then I'm coming." No sooner did those words leave my mouth did our Roomba turn on all by itself. I wasn't even in the same room. It makes a distinct ding sound when it turns on, so there was no mistaking it. I go check the Roomba's charging station, and sure enough, the Roomba is already on and doing its thing. Our Roomba is a mid-range model. It doesn't have cameras or a microphone, so there's no way I could have done some kind of voice-activated thing. It was just so bizarre that the only time it has ever turned on by itself is when I loudly verbalized that I wanted to turn it on. My ex and I moved into a new subdivision over a dozen years ago. We all moved in at approximately the same time, so we were all new neighbors all at once, which is sort of unusual. We were at the end of a cul-de-sac with a huge plot of woods next to us, and immediately I noticed some strange things going on. The first was that in the middle of the night, I would wake up to not being able to move, and a blue orb would float into the room, and it would either go into me or my husband. The only way I could describe it is it was altering our mood. It was making whoever was the recipient of the orb become very depressed and agitated. We would take turns being depressed and agitated over the course of the next 12 years. And I thought I was just dreaming, but I saw the patterns, and it was unsettling. But who would believe me? Neighbors were starting to have issues with natural springs popping up in crawl spaces. Everybody was having issues with strange things going on in their crawl space. One by one, all the neighbors started having issues. They would move without saying a word, or get divorced, or they would be fighting in the driveway for everyone to hear. One family even had a fire, but it seems like everybody was having major drama, one by one. I can't explain it, but the energy around all of it was just pure anger, and it didn't feel inherent to my neighbors. It felt like some weird outside pressure. We had constant parties and get-togethers, and we're all very close, at first, but it started falling apart. Then, in 2019, I had a major unknown illness with a 103.6-degree fever. I've never had that high of a fever. I didn't move at all for 3 days, but on the third day, it was like I was never sick. When I woke up, I wanted to change my whole life. I wasn't happy in my marriage, and I knew I had to save myself. I had to remove myself from the situation, because my husband at the time was being awful to me, and the 20-plus years we had been together, he had just been getting so much worse. He had always been OCD, but now it feels like he went off the deep end. Hoarding, spending like I've never seen before, and depression. But he was angry, and he was taking it out on me. Up to this point, all of this just felt like a coincidence, or my imagination going crazy. And then, I talked to a psychic, someone who I happen to know from my childhood. She said that the house not only was haunted, but it had a couple of portals, and entities were coming into the house because of the negative energy, and they were feeding off of it and making it expand. And somehow my positive energy was keeping some of it at bay, but after I moved out, it's like the negative energy exploded, and it was out of control. They were attracted to the area, and my ex-husband's bad energy. She said that the land was cursed or something bad happened there. She thinks it was either an animal slaughterhouse, or people died there. That's what she told me. Make of it what you will. I was at the beginning of the divorce process, and my ex was on vacation, so I got back into the house to get things. The energy in there was just awful. Maybe it was my emotions, but all I could do was cry and scream, and I could feel them trying to grab onto me emotionally. So I opened all the windows and blasted happy music, and I cleaned that place from top to bottom. But I ended up not taking a lot of my possessions because everything felt like it had been pulled into the mud. I can't explain it better than that. My psychic friend corroborated and said yes, she could even feel it. And even if she tried to cleanse it, it would just keep coming back. She was happy that I was getting out of there, and she told me to never go back. Something else to mention, in the almost 2 years that I've been away from the house and I've been living alone, I can feel this purge of energy, and it has been overwhelming. It could be the PTSD from being with an abusive partner, but I just feel like I'm more exhausted than I've ever been, and the relief of finally feeling safe has been all-consuming. If you've ever been in fight or flight for a long time, and that's gone away, you would understand what I'm saying. once you aren't in survival mode anymore. It's like a tsunami of emotions comes out. So we're at the point of the divorce where we're arguing about the house and who's going to get the house. I woke up this morning after having dreams all night telling me to let the house go because it's evil, and the negativity and entities tied to this are completely out of control now. My dreams also told me that the neighbors who I love so dearly have been pulled into it, and to let them go as well. The emotions surrounding this have been completely overwhelming. This was my dream house, so I was conflicted about letting it go. But now, I feel strongly that I just need to walk away. Again, all of this could be a coincidence, but this was just off the charts strange from start to finish. And that same psychic friend had cleared thousands of houses, and she said that's the worst she's ever seen, of course. Especially because once she cleared it, they came back immediately. So, what do you think? As my first ever post here, I wanted to share a personal experience from my previous home. It's something that's been on my mind for a while, and since Ramadan is here again, I figured it's the perfect time to finally share it. I'll probably break this into parts because, well, life's busy, and I don't have the time to write it all at once. Anyway, here goes. It was an ordinary day, just like any other. I was at home helping my mom prepare for iftar, the meal to break the fast during Ramadan, when we realized we were out of milk. My dad wasn't home to get it, so I volunteered to make a quick run to the supermarket nearby. It wasn't late, only around 4 p.m., and I figured I'd be back well before Maghrib, which was around 7. The whole trip shouldn't have taken more than 20 to 30 minutes max. I used to live in a high-rise apartment building. Our flat was on the 4th floor, and the building had a lift that was usually reliable. There was an option to take the stairs, but since I was fasting and feeling low on energy, I decided to take the lift to save myself the effort. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my shoes, and stepped into the lift. The doors closed with a soft ding, and I pressed a button for the ground floor. We didn't usually get to know our neighbors well, but when we first moved in, we heard some rumors about the lift. Some people said it was haunted or something like that, but everyone still used it, so we thought it was probably just made up stories. You know how people love to gossip, right? Anyway, I didn't think much of it at the time. The descent was smooth and uneventful. I remember glancing at my watch just as I stepped into the lift. It was 4:13 p.m. Plenty of time. The supermarket was just a 5-minute walk away, and I'd be back without any trouble. The lift hummed softly as it descended, the numbers on the display panel ticking down. 4, 3, 2, but something felt off. I can't quite explain it, but the air inside the lift seemed heavier and colder. I brushed it off as my imagination, or maybe it was because it was my first time using that particular lift. Plus, lifts can feel strange sometimes, right? I shook my head and focused on the descending numbers. 2, 1, G. When the lift reached the ground floor, the door slid open with their usual ding. I stepped out, glancing at my watch again. 5 p.m. Wait, that couldn't be right. I frowned, staring at the time. The lift ride couldn't have taken more than a minute or two. How had 47 minutes passed? I shook my watch, thinking it might be malfunctioning, but the seconds ticked on, steady and unrelenting. At that moment, I just shrugged it off. I thought maybe fasting was getting to me, or perhaps I'd misread the time earlier. I didn't want to overthink it, so I headed to the supermarket, grabbed the milk, and started walking back. But what happened on the way back? Well, that's when things got really weird. The sun was starting to set, and I checked my watch. It was around 5:13 or something, I don't remember exactly. It was that typical Ramadan time where everyone was either at home preparing for iftar or at the mosque for prayers, so I knew I had to hurry. I reached my apartment building and stepped into the lobby. Strangely, the lift was waiting, its doors wide open, almost as if it had been expecting me. I thanked God it was empty at this time when I needed to rush, but I still hesitated for a moment, glancing at the stairs, thinking taking them might have been the sensible thing to do, but come on, it couldn't be that serious, right? Nothing serious had happened to me yet, and I was tired, my feet ached, and I just wanted to get home. So, I stepped inside. The lift was empty, as usual, but the air felt different. it was colder than before. There was a faint, almost metallic smell that I couldn't place. I pressed the button for the 4th floor and the doors closed with that same soft ding. To distract myself, I took out my phone and started scrolling through my WhatsApp messages. The lift began its ascent, the numbers on the display panel lighting up one by one. G, 1, 2, and then it stopped. Not at my floor, not at any floor. The lift just stopped. I didn't even have time to process it. The lights flickered, and for a few seconds, everything went dark. That's when my heart jumped into my throat, and I instinctively reached up to steady myself against the wall. The emergency light came on, casting a dim, eerie glow. I pressed the button for the 4th floor again, but nothing happened. The lift was completely still. Honestly, I instantly regretted taking the lift. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling. Is anyone there? I was screaming in panic. I'm a little scared of lifts, too. And no response. I immediately tried using my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Not even a single bar. I tried the emergency button, but it was dead, too. No sound, no response. Just silence. Just to let you guys know, everything was happening way too quickly, not giving me enough time to think. And then I heard it. A faint tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on the lift doors. At first it gave me a ray of hope, but it was soft, almost imperceptible. Then it grew louder, more insistent. However, the knocking didn't last more than a minute. My breath quickened, and I backed away from the doors. It was all so strange. Could this sound be a hallucination? I'm stuck in the lift. Please help, I managed to say somehow. For a moment, there was complete silence, and then the lift shuddered, and the lights flickered again. When they came back on, the display panel showed the number 4, and the door slid open. I stumbled out, my legs shaky, and I looked around. The hallway was empty, just as it should be, and I literally rushed to my apartment. It couldn't have taken more than 30 seconds, I was that quick. And to let you know, the lift incident itself didn't last more than 3 to 4 minutes. I felt my soul regain its consciousness when my mom opened the door. All I could think was it some kind of mechanical failure, or was it something else? When I got inside, the table was ready to be served, and everyone started showing concern about where I'd been. I looked at them, baffled, and then I turned my head to the wall clock. That's when I realized. 6:34 p.m. I didn't have much time to explain except, sorry, the lift stopped on the way up, as the Maghrib was called, and we began to break our fast. But everyone was way too shocked. They couldn't understand how no one had heard my voice, and I never called anyone, especially since the lift was supposedly stuck for more than an hour. Later, I managed to explain everything to them, but it sounded so unreal that they were, of course, skeptical. We somehow avoided that lift after that until we finally decided to move somewhere else. My dad told me later that when he shared the story with one of the neighbors, they believed it was real because their son had experienced something similar. We also found a lot of terrifying stories about the lift from other neighbors, which is probably why the lift was mostly empty and why nobody used it. Thinking back on it now, it all makes sense. My great-grandmother from my mother's side passed away 3 years ago. 2 months before her death, she told us about an incident many years ago when she was a preteen. She had a maternal aunt who was well known for her beauty. They came from a family of zamindars, aka nobles. Ever since she turned 12, her grandfather started having nightmares of a man who told him to never let her granddaughter get married, as she would be his wife. The grandfather sought the help of an elder to know what that dream meant. The elder said that the man he saw in his dream was a jinn who had fallen for his granddaughter. Though he didn't believe in jinns, he was scared for his granddaughter, and thus rejected most people who proposed to marry to her. But there was one person he couldn't refuse. That was his best friend's grandson. That boy was her childhood friend, and he was quite frequent in their house. So when he proposed to her in front of the whole family, the grandpa had no choice but to accept it. She, the aunt, was 15 at the time. Everything proceeded without any problem until the night before the marriage. The bride sat in a room with her bridesmaids, including my great-grandmother, when the incident occurred. Suddenly, the bride's hair, which was tied traditionally, became extremely hard, and her head started hurting. No one knew what was going on except the grandfather. His worst nightmare came to reality. The hair stayed like that the whole night, and some other paranormal incidences also occurred at night. That night, the grandfather saw the same man in his dream. This time, he was furious and warned him, "Never make that mistake again, or the consequences would be bad." Well, the next day, her hair had become normal again, but the marriage was canceled. The boy was no longer allowed in their house. Well, until the grandfather passed away 3 years later. After that, the boy started visiting them again, and slowly everyone forgot the grandfather's warning. 5 years after the incident, the marriage happened again. This time, nothing paranormal happened. The groom was dressed in a white traditional sherwani. His face was glowing with happiness, but unfortunately, that happiness was not for long. That night, the bride was in her room talking with her friends and sisters. Suddenly, the windows and the gates of the house started shaking violently, as screams could be heard from outside. A terrible stench started coming from the bride's room. Everyone came out except the bride, who was crying there. The groom realized his mistake and took permission from the father before entering the room. Suddenly, the door closed behind him, and both of them got locked inside. It took about 3 or 4 hours to break the gate from outside. What they saw shook them to their core. The room was stained with blood. The bride was missing, and the groom was lying on the floor, his head twisted to the opposite side. His eyes were popped out, and his skin was pale. The beautiful white sherwani became stained with blood. On the chair, there was a small bag, and inside of it was 1 gold coin, the price of the bride. The father spent day and night trying to find the girl, but they couldn't find her. In the end, they had no choice but to accept that she was gone. The bag was put in an iron chest and locked before being buried underground. They considered it as their daughter's grave. Well, 3 years later, the father saw a dream where that man told him that his daughter was alive and happy. They also had 2 children together, and the bag was a treasure which will give you 1 gold coin each time you put your hand in. Well, the father never checked if what he said was true or not, as nothing can make up for the loss of his daughter. Today, that house is nothing but an abandoned haunted house filled with ghost stories. It seems that that was the first haunted incident in that house. It's pretty close to my cousin's house where we go during vacations, and maybe that chest is still in there somewhere, but we'll never know. As for those who are curious about what a jinn is, I'll put a short explanation here. What is a jinn? A jinn is an ancient creation of God that has been on Earth far longer than humans. While humans were created from clay, jinns were created from smokeless fire. They have free will similar to humans, and God has made them invisible to our eyes. Though normally they are just as afraid of us as we are afraid of them, there have been many instances of them trespassing into the human realm. Also, there are humans who trespass into their realm too. These are ghosts and entities that people encounter. Most of them were banished before humans came to Earth. They normally live in secluded places, abandoned houses, and graveyards. They usually don't harm humans unless you trespass into their territory, like houses that have been abandoned for years. They may have different races with different powers, like shapeshifters, flyers, and etc. Now I think it's about time I share my own experience with paranormal entities. Though it's not as intense as my grandfather's encounter, it isn't very normal either. This incident occurred in 2021, when I went to my grandparents' village during vacation. There's a local folklore about man-eating demons in our village. It is said that they live in graveyards and eat the flesh of dead humans who didn't live a righteous life. But sometimes, they take the form of a beautiful woman or a crying child to attract people at night and eat them alive. It's a pretty well-known story. We've been hearing it since childhood, though I didn't believe it. Jinns exist, but they can't hurt humans in normal circumstances. One day I went to see a performance in the neighboring village with my friend Armin. By the time the performance ended, it was almost midnight, and we started coming back home. On the way back, we had to cross an old graveyard. It was one of the biggest paranormal hotspots in our village. We were talking about the performance the whole time until we reached the graveyard, and both of us became silent. We've crossed this road many times, but never this late at night. Our bodies felt heavy as we crossed it. Every noise felt paranormal. Every step felt slower than the last. Suddenly, we heard a faint noise. As we walked down the road, the sound became louder and clearer. It was the cry of a child. Of course, we just had to run into a ghoul. I felt like crying and I looked beside me. Armin was just as scared. The most terrifying thing is the fact that we heard it means it already knows about our presence. As we slowly went closer to the sound, we saw a child about 1 to 2 years old crying beside the road. We did not approach it. We didn't even directly look at it. As we walked by, my eyes started tearing up. Each and every cell in my body told me to run. I barely managed to keep my sanity. I would have probably passed out if I was alone. As we went past it, the crying became louder and louder, to the point that I felt like my eardrum would burst. Once we were about 20 meters away from it, the crying stopped, and I could no longer control my body. I ended up looking back and I saw nothing. It was gone. There wasn't any sign of it around. I took a deep breath and my heart felt lighter. Armin looked at me. He was also relieved. But before we could say a single sentence, we heard a demonic scream, and it came from the graveyard. That was the last straw. We ran as fast as we could. I could feel my consciousness slipping away, and we didn't stop until we reached our village. There were a few people sitting beside a campfire playing cards, and the moment we saw them, I became unconscious. I woke up in my grandparents' home. Armin had already woken up, and he told them everything. I confirmed his claims. We saw a ghoul. We did. Some believed us and some didn't. I got an earful from my grandmother, and it's been 4 years since that incident. We still talk about it when I go back to the village during vacations. I still wonder what would have happened if I had been alone at that time. Maybe I wouldn't be here telling you guys this incident, but one thing is for sure, I'm never using that road at night, ever again. Anytime something's described as demonic in a story, I have to stop my eyes from rolling so far that they rip out of my skull. So my girlfriend and I recently moved to an oldish apartment. We've had a few experiences recently that have had us scratching our heads. To be honest, I've not always believed in paranormal occurrences, but I do admit, I've seen odd shit since I was a kid. My girlfriend has felt a quote-unquote presence caressing her face and brushing her hair behind her ear. I describe it as a presence because I have no clue as what else to call it. My girlfriend has only described that one interaction besides the moved and missing items. We can't fully say it wasn't our fault, but we have observed a lot of things inexplicably disappear, only to reappear, be moved, and the small things being knocked over that we can just write off as some unseen coincidence. I have twice experienced similar things. Once feeling like someone was pulling off my headphones while working on music, and once when my controller, which I left on the couch cushion while getting a snack, was knocked off the couch. My girlfriend witnessed my headphones get pulled down my head and said it was odd. I was home alone when the controller was, quote-unquote, thrown. We didn't have any pets at that time either. Both experiences were accompanied by the cold dread shiver that lingers and causes all your hair to rise. To further expand on the point about inexplicable things, our pantry causes the same feeling of dread in my girlfriend and I. When we viewed the apartment, we loved the pantry and back room. Very spacious and so great. Since we moved in though, the same feeling accompanies both areas. A few weeks ago, while tidying, I grabbed something off the table to put away in the pantry. When I left, after putting said forgotten item away, I spun the latch shut so the door stopped and didn't swing open. A few minutes later, I noticed the door was now wide open. Now, I'm sure I closed it, but maybe I spun it too far? But I think I would have noticed it creaking open earlier than I did. That creeped me out. This incident happened today, or this morning. I got out of bed and went to let the cats out. I did not have the cats for any of the stories except for during this one, and the pantry latch one for those of you curious. Pretty normal so far, except only my kitten exits the kennel. We keep the kennel in a small storage area in the back. After not seeing my girlfriend's old cat come out, I was shocked. Not only was he gone, but the kitten didn't follow him. That's odd, as the kitten loves to follow and harass the older cat. Then, I found her cat. He was on a stack of shit beside the kennel under a pillow. I removed him and then inspected him. I couldn't find any gaps in our metal kennel or bent wires and open areas. Also, no direct path away from the kennel to where he was, without literally walking out the front. But I knew that already because the kitten, a little bundle of energy, was in the kennel still. But this above average sized male cat was just chilling out of it. The kennel was fully closed too when I started opening it today. Even if the old cat was smart enough to get the door open, I doubt he would think to quickly trap the other cat inside by closing it after himself, even if he could. Obviously, I called my girlfriend and then we spoke again about it this evening, but she said she never went in there before leaving this morning, and I didn't see her go near the kennel. So, I would say we're experiencing a lot of paranormal activity, but I wanted to hear some opinions as well as maybe some ideas as to what's going on. Does this sound like a ghost or a spirit or a demon or just an overactive mind to you? So, for some quick context, I've always been a believer in the paranormal. Though, besides a few small instances that could be written off in my preteen years, I can't say that before this, I have ever really experienced anything. My fiancé had experienced things prior, but remains a skeptic to this day. Apologies in advance, this is kind of long. About 5 years ago, my fiancé and I, as well as one of our mutual best friends, who we'll call Kyle, had been living together for a few years, and at the height of lockdown during the pandemic, decided to start a roundtable style stream on Twitch, where we talked all manner of nerdy things. We decided about 6 months into this to look for a house as, at the time, 3 people, 2 dogs, and a whole semi-professional stream setup were crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment, and our lease was coming to an end anyway. We ended up signing a lease for a 5-bed home, which came with an insanely affordable price tag. The house was weird as all hell in the sense of the layout. 2 stories with each story split into 2 subfloors, so essentially a 4-story home, including a fully finished basement that was about half a story lower than the ground floor. When I say fully finished, I mean it was essentially a full-on basement apartment, including a small living room, bed and bath, and a laundry room. Kyle claimed that for himself. The main living room and kitchen were on the top 3rd floor, and half a story up was the master suite, and 2 smaller bedrooms. Very odd in general, but it worked as we all had a bedroom and a home office, and we set up the basement living room as our streaming studio. The night we moved in, I was upstairs unpacking boxes in the master suite, while my fiancé and some friends were down in the garage organizing storage boxes. I remember the hair on the back of my neck standing up suddenly, and out of nowhere, something made a very loud "ha" sound in my ear, almost like someone whisper yelling "hi," but only making the H sound. I immediately booked it down into the garage, and it was explained away as me being overtired or maybe hearing a plastic bag rustling in the room. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to push the point. Not long after that, our dogs started to act up. For context, there was a very odd window in the master shower. It was large and had no screen or blind, and was literally in the wall facing out over the side of the house, and could be seen into directly by both our next door neighbor and the neighbor whose backyard was catty corner from ours. I'm a tall gal, but luckily it was high enough in the wall that I wasn't putting on a show in the shower. The master bedroom also wasn't separated by a door, it was just an archway into the bathroom from the bedroom area. We had both agreed that the window gave us an unsettling feeling of being watched at night, even as it was on the 2nd floor. But then our dog started growling into the darkness of the bathroom at night, as we decided to hang a curtain to mitigate the creepiness factor of that. They would still sometimes push their heads past the curtain from the bedroom and growl, which was lovely. The next issue that started to occur was an overwhelming feeling of being watched when I was alone in the basement. Kyle would often travel for years at a time, as his job was fully remote, and he would go to stay with his significant other for as long as a month at a time. It wasn't an issue when we first moved in. I would go on about my laundry, and nothing was weird. But as time passed, I would feel actual gut-churning dread if I was in the basement. And each time I went into the laundry room, regardless of the AC running or any outside factor, the door to the room would inevitably slowly be pushed shut behind me. It never once happened when another person was down there with me, but it struck a primal fear in me each time I was down there alone. The door closing in and of itself was not scary per se, but coupled with the overwhelming feeling like I was being watched, turned into the intense feeling of being hunted, like something wanted to trap me in the room. The worst occurrence happened late into the night, one weekend long after we had all returned to normal work. All of us are night owls, and as such, I was still awake around 3 a.m. watching a movie in the bedroom, while my fiancé was across the hall in his office playing video games. I must have drifted off to sleep and been awoken by something in the movie, but I had my first and only experience with sleep paralysis that night. I couldn't talk, I couldn't move, and I struggled to breathe. What was likely only 30 seconds or so felt like hours. But once it passed, I called for my fiancé and he helped me calm down from such a scary experience. I later turned in and went to sleep sometime around 4 in the morning, only for him to burst into the room to shake me awake and ask if I had just been in his office. I'm sure I had a grumpy look on my face when I asked if he recalled how I was asleep, and he had to wake me up to ask me, but he looked shaken, which woke me up pretty quickly. He told me how he had been in the middle of a match when he saw someone walk into his office from the door behind his chair. He wears glasses, and glasses wearers know you can sometimes catch reflections like that. He assumed it was me waiting for his match to end, and typically if it's a non-emergent situation, I wait, and then he'll move his noise-canceling headphones to the side so we can talk. He went about playing until something suddenly jerked the back of his office chair. The chair was jerked back so hard that he almost fell. Other weird things happened in that house. Bumps in the night, taps on the walls and from the attic, our dogs being weird and sometimes either not wanting to go into the backyard at night or not wanting to come inside from the backyard, feeling like you shouldn't go down the long hallway upstairs at night. We stayed there for 3 years, and the energy of the house got progressively worse and worse throughout our time there. But eventually we moved out and haven't had anything weird happen since. I'm not sure what was in that house or what happened there before we moved in, but I've never experienced anything like it before, and I hope I never do again. My childhood home always had a somewhat thick, negative energy to it. I lived there from ages 4 to 14. I remember my parents having family and family friends over as a child, and a few of them making verbal comments about how the energy felt dark and oppressive, and that they would get the creeps if they stayed the night for any sort of reason. In my experience, as I aged through elementary school, the parts of the house that felt the darkest and most ominous were the whole upstairs, the game room, my bedroom, and the bathroom. And downstairs, it was the laundry room that felt dark. In general, the other parts of the house felt okay enough. As a child, I experienced significant fear around sleeping in my bedroom alone, or at all, even if my mom accompanied me in bed. Even during the day, if I was playing with my toys, I would eventually get the creeps. It felt like something was lurking, observing me, slowly making its way. Most of the time, after some time playing in there, that creeping feeling would make the hair on my arms stand, and I would look around my room. My eyes would always lock onto my closet door and stare at it in fear. Eventually, I would find the courage to rip my attention away from it and flee out of my room. On one particular day, I was playing with my toys on the floor of my bedroom before dinner. I was excited about the toys that I was playing with because I had just gotten them for my birthday, and no one else was upstairs but me. I get called downstairs for dinner, I go down and eat, and after dinner, I came back up pretty quickly as I was excited to continue playing with my new toys. I walked into my room and froze. My toys were in completely different positions and locations than where I'd left them. Action figures that I previously had sitting were now stood up straight and feet away from where I was sitting before. Toys that were on a piece of toy furniture were now taken off of the furniture and etc. Almost every toy was moved. I was about 6 or so when this happened. In my rational brain, I asked my sister, who's 2.5 years older than me, if she went into my room, and she said no. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. For years, every night I would sleep in my parents' bedroom. That was the usual routine. I adamantly would not sleep in my bedroom. It was more than a childlike defiance. No, I was petrified to sleep in there. So much so that I had an unfortunate bedwetting issue well into 2nd and 3rd grade. One night my mom was able to get me to lay in there at night alone, and I had full body shakes from fear. I remember so vividly not being able to sleep at all, and getting so scared that I hid myself under my blankets, where I laid awake for what felt like 2 hours or so. I remember how badly I was sweating, getting so hot from being tucked tightly under my duvet. My shirt and pants were wet with sweat. Under the duvet, I felt like something was looming over top of me, like the vastness of darkness in my room housed an energy that I could not look in the face, and the dark corners were swirling with an energy, waiting for me to come out of the covers. Eventually, it was so hot under there that I had to come out, otherwise I would have started having trouble breathing, more than I already was. I whipped the covers off of me, and I felt the colder flow of air grace my skin, and immediately darted my eyes all over my room to analyze, and I just started sobbing, bawling in fear. I feared my closet, which was cracked with the light on as a nightlight. I felt exposed and vulnerable to the veil, which was thin in my bedroom. I remember getting up quickly and running out of my room, closing the door as an energy shut off, and sitting in the hallway hugging myself, crying. As I got older, I was able to handle sleeping in my room a little better. I was in 4th grade, about 9 years old, when I was able to kind of sleep in there. On one of the first nights I slept in there alone, I fell asleep in bed but woke up on one of our living room couches, which faced the laundry room. It was dark in the living room, with only some moonlight coming in from our tall windows, which faced our dark backyard. I was lying on my side, my field of vision in front of me, including the living room, which flowed into the dining room and the laundry room. Initially, I was insanely confused why I was on the couch. I didn't feel tired upon waking, I just felt awake. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness of the laundry room, I realized I was being watched. I'll never forget the face of the entity standing there, looking at me with an unwavering, sinister gaze. Again, in my rational brain, I tried to imagine what could have been in the laundry room that looked like this demonic entity. I couldn't think of anything that was in there that could have caused the illusion. In there was just the washer and dryer and cabinets. Nothing else. No clothes or towels, no posters or artwork, nothing. I stared into the darkness of the laundry room that, as my eyes further adjusted, seemed to illuminate this creature more. Pale white skin, big circular black darkness around the eyes, which peered upwards at me from a downward pointed chin. Hair that was long, black, and stringy, its pale white fabric skin seemed to disappear vertically into the darkness. I felt frozen in fear. It wasn't moving. I was holding my breath, keeping as still as I could from being seen. I was hardly blinking, and I wasn't going to go back to sleep. For some, this just sounds like sleep paralysis. I know for a fact that this was not sleep paralysis, because I was 100% not moving on purpose. I was not trying to move and couldn't. No, I was deathly afraid, and would not allow myself to bring attention to myself. I stared at it until the sun came up, and my parents' alarms started going off to get us ready for school. When the sun rose, I remember how stiffly I moved to stand up. I kept my body and back pressed to the wall next to the couch as I made it to the corner into my parents' room. never turning my back towards the laundry room. Minutes later, when my parents were up and I needed to get ready for school, I ascended the stairs to my room and found my bedroom blanket strewn down the stairs, vertically, which would symbolize it falling off my body as I slept walked out of bed and down the stairs, leading to me waking up on the couch. I don't remember what ensued following that, who I told, if I told anyone, and etc. All I know is that around that same time frame, I had another sleepwalking episode where I wound up on the couch after falling asleep on my bed. One time, when I had woken on the couch, I had articles of clothing taken off of me that were put in places that they would have not fallen onto naturally. The places I found them almost appeared purposeful, and since these 2 sleepwalking incidences, I've yet to do it again. I started experiencing other things as well. In my room during the day, as well as at night, toys in my closet would start making sounds out of nowhere. I wasn't as scared as I used to be when I was younger, so I was able to handle these happenings and feelings of fear better. It never diminished the dark feeling in the corners, though. One night, I generally was having a hard time falling asleep, so I lay awake in the quiet of the night with everyone else asleep. I was staring at the little sliver of hallway ceiling I was able to see from inside my room, which was slightly illuminated due to a nightlight or something from far away in the bathroom. For hours, the silhouette of a man's side profile was on the ceiling. To compare how it looked unironically, it looked like how people online describe the Hat Man. It looked like it had a top hat on, a big brow bone, a big nose, and a strong chin, and at some point it disappeared. I could continue on about the energy in my house and all the little things that happened. My main experience was what was in my laundry room. I have always hesitated to tell people about it because of the Hollywood-esque nature of the way that the entity looked. I've only told a few people, and even then, feel like they think I'm conjuring up something that I'd seen in Hollywood movies. As an adult, I've spoken to the same family friends who used to visit with me when I was a child about the energy in that house. Our one family friend who is particularly sensitive to energy said one night she had stayed with her husband upstairs. My parents were not shy about parties, so often our family friends were too drunk to drive home. They would stay the night, and if needed, my parents would offer my bed. These family friends have always been safe and trusted adults in my life. However, this particular family friend was like an aunt to me, and I don't recall being at home that night when she slept in my bed. She's told me in my adult life that the night she slept in my bed, which she had never had before, she said she woke up many times in the night feeling my bed shaking erratically. Not super strong shaking, but enough of an erratic movement to the entire bed frame to wake her up many times in the night. Now, as an adult, I don't think too much about all of what I'd experienced. I remember in middle school when I watched the first Insidious movie, I connected so deeply to the movie. I resonated so much with Dalton, as he seemed to be the target of what was going on and having these confusing things happen to him. I feel that I experienced more in that house than my sister or parents did. I felt exposed, constantly, in that house to whatever was there.